Hello everybody, hope you're doing well and thanks for joining us for another video. Now, we're covering a different topic than I usually cover because in recent weeks and months I've seen quite a sharp increase in the number of posts on social media claiming that high-altitude passenger planes are spraying everybody with chemicals. A few posts in particular caught my eye just in the last few days as they're being shared by people that have quite a large following on X. The first post came from Matt Wallace, showing a video of a plane with the caption, "Meanwhile, while no one is paying attention." This has been viewed 162,000 times with 3,200 likes and 900 retweets. The same video was also posted by Concerned Citizen with the caption, "Great clip to send anybody who somehow still thinks these are naturally occurring ice crystals created by plane engines. It clearly isn't." This is at 106,000 views, 4,700 likes, and 1,800 retweets. And someone then responded with a post basically trying to make this a meme, saying, "I rest my case, Your Honour. On an altitude where there is no contrail to be seen, the chemtrail machine in operation." Basically, their argument is that typically when people show videos of planes that have white trails behind them, those are condensation trails caused by hot exhaust gas from the jet engine quickly cooling in the freezing high-altitude air. But in this video, there's no white trails coming from the engines, they're instead originating from near the wingtips. Thus, they conclude, this is spraying chemicals. Which technically it is, but not in the way these people are trying to claim. Now, the first thing I noticed about this when I watched it was the writing on the bottom of the aeroplane. 777X. The 777X is the latest generation of the Boeing 777 family, which is still in development. It's not actually entered service yet. The only planes that I'm aware of where they paint the model number in huge text like this is manufacturer liveries, and the 777X is quite notable within the aviation community for its ongoing delays during development. Boeing first laid out plans for the 777X back in 2011, with the aim to have a first flight in 2017 and have it enter service in 2019. But it didn't actually make its first flight until 2020, and at the moment it doesn't look like it's likely to enter service until next year at the earliest. There's only 5 prototypes that have been built, and currently they're still working on trying to get the plane certified. It can't enter service until it's successfully demonstrated and been signed off on all aspects of flight and system handlings. In fact, this article on Simply Flying, all about the 777X certification, spells it out perfectly when they say, quote, "Aircraft certification is not a single milestone, but a lengthy series of steps that must be completed before an aircraft can carry passengers. One of the most important steps for the 777X is the Type Inspection Authorization, or TIA, which allows FAA pilots and engineers to participate directly in the flight test process. Once TIA is granted, the aircraft enters the final phase of certification testing, and during this period, regulators verify that the aircraft meets all safety performance and reliability requirements under real-world conditions." End quote. So currently, Boeing are in the stages of trying to get the 777X certified, and this is one of the planes that is making such a flight. So what is it doing here? It's dumping fuel. This page from Skyberry details about fuel dumping, and it highlights that for most aircraft, their maximum takeoff weight is much higher than their maximum permitted landing weight, given that on landing they can come down onto the runway with quite some force, and they need to be sure that the plane can, one, remain structurally intact, and that it's able to slow down that weight after they land. This isn't a problem normally because planes naturally lose a lot of their weight during flight as they burn fuel. However, if a plane experiences a problem shortly after takeoff and they need to land whilst their weight exceeds the maximum landing weight, then they will typically dump some fuel to bring them down to a safe weight. So the fuel dump system is a safety feature of the aircraft, which means it needs to be tested and proven that it works correctly in order for the plane to be certified. The Skyberry article here even highlights, quote, "During the certification of the fuel dumping system, the manufacturer must demonstrate that the system operates without fire hazard, No fuel or fumes can enter any part of the aircraft. The fuel must also discharge clear of any part of the aircraft, and jettison operation must not adversely affect the controllability of the aircraft." End quote. Now, the 777X is a new plane, but there's been other variants of 777s in service for more than 30 years. I found this website, Trans Global Training, which has a page all about the 777's fuel dump system, which shows that the fuel dump nozzles are on the trailing edge of the wings way out beyond the engines. They even show a photo of a fuel dump taking place viewed from on board. In fact, a 777 made the news in the US a few years ago for dumping fuel. Usually fuel dumps are done at high altitude to allow time for the fuel to evaporate, or they're done out over the ocean. But in 2020, Delta Flight 89 had engine trouble less than 20 minutes after leaving Los Angeles International Airport and had to dump fuel before landing, and they ended up dumping fuel at only 2,000 feet over a densely populated area, including all over a school. There were even photos taken of it happening at the time, and you can see the same trails being produced from the same parts of the wings that we see in this video. Not only that, but I found a Reddit post where someone had posted the same video of the 777X, but had actually detailed that it was taken on March 21st, 2026, that it was Boeing 777XWH001 with registration N779XW conducting fuel jettison testing near Moses Lake Airport. And so I checked flight radar, and we can see that indeed on March 21st, that plane initially left Seattle at 10:20 in the morning, landing at Moses Lake 35 minutes later, just before 11 a.m. Then at 1 p.m. it conducted a low-level flight of around 4,000 feet, lasting 22 minutes, returning to Moses Lake, taking back off almost immediately for another 25-minute flight that again stayed at very low altitude, landing back at Moses just before 2 p.m., and then setting off half an hour later to return to Seattle. In fact, looking back through its flight, this plane had basically spent the last month and a half conducting short flights, usually less than an hour, around and between Moses Lake and Seattle. Not a particularly dense population around Moses Lake, so it seems quite unlikely for such a large plane, that hasn't even been certified yet, would be being used to chemtrail basically the back end of nowhere day after day for more than a month. So, like I said, technically this plane is spraying chemicals in the video, but the chemical in question is jet fuel. It's not claiming to be contrails, like Concerned Citizen suggests. It's a test aircraft being used by Boeing to try and get certification in order to allow them to get the plane into service. They need to test the fuel dump systems for certification in order to check that it meets the criteria laid out in the Skybree article. Does the system work safely without causing a fire? Can they dump fuel without fumes entering the aircraft? Does the fuel dump impact the handling of the aircraft during operation? That's why the fuel dump nozzles are placed so far out along the wing, because it keeps the fuel trail clear of the main fuselage, so it's nowhere near the passengers, and they want to keep the fuel trail well clear of the extremely hot engines and exhaust, otherwise the entire wing could catch fire. And then the second post that caught my eye was this one from Jasper Truth, stating, "Plane accidentally starts dispersing chemtrails on the runway, oopsies." Now, the smoke on this one isn't coming from the engines or the wings, so it's not a typical contrail and it's not a fuel dump either. It's coming from the very back of the plane. Again, technically this is spraying a chemical, but again, it's not chemtrails. Whilst most planes have 2 or 4 main engines which provide the thrust for the aircraft as well as providing electrical power during flight, if a plane ever loses all its main engines, all of the power to the aircraft systems and the lighting and everything would also stop. Yet, when you park up a plane and they power down the engines so that everyone can safely disembark, the cabin lights are still on. That's because all commercial planes carry an additional extra small engine called the APU, or Auxiliary Power Unit. These are used to provide electrical power to the aircraft whilst it's parked at the gate, or in the rare event that the main engines are shut down during flight. The APU is a small gas turbine that's located in the tail section of aircraft. If you look at the rear of most planes, the fuselage doesn't taper to a point. It's actually got an opening on the back. That is the exhaust for the APU. And the video here is showing smoke plumes coming from the APU. Now, the aircraft in this video is a Boeing 737. They have the same APU exhaust on the tails. And here is a video showing a 737's APU being started up whilst on the ground. Now, this video shows APUs don't typically smoke a lot on startup like we're seeing in this other video. However, on occasions, such as perhaps if the plane's been in for maintenance, there may be residual fuel in the lines which on startup can then start to burn off, causing this smoke for a short period until the burn off clears. A bit like if you over-oil your car, you'll get excessive smoke out of the exhaust until the oil has cleaned off. I was even able to find other videos of other planes' APUs smoking during startup. And like I say, APUs are typically only used in situations where the aircraft can't get its electrical power from the main engines. So during flight, the APUs typically aren't running. So if this video was showing a chemtrail system accidentally being used on the ground, then the same smoke plumes would also be being produced during a flight whenever they're spraying the chemicals. Which means you'd not only have contrails from the engines, but you'd also have a third plume coming from the center line from the APU. But you only ever see 2 contrails from twin-engine aircraft, not 3. If the APU is producing a contrail during flight, that's normally because the main engines have been shut down, which means they wouldn't be producing contrails, so the plane would only have a single trail behind it. So there we are. These videos are claiming that planes are using chemtrail systems that are meant to harm people, when in actuality they're showing regular functions of a plane that are actually designed to help keep passengers safe. As I say, this isn't a topic that I've covered before, but it's one that seems to be gaining a lot of traction on social media, so who knows, maybe I'll address some more posts in the future. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video and you haven't already done so, then please do consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons, and hopefully we'll see you in the next video.